Hello and welcome back. It's Mr. Key here with chapter 2 of our bigger book, The Wind in the Willows. I've had a bit of a change of scenery today as I work out the best spot in the house to record these videos from. And we're going to try it out here today and catch up with our friends Moley and Ratty. Yesterday we met Mr. Mole escaping his spring cleaning in order to get a bit of fresh air before he wandered down to the river and met and made a brand new friend in the water rat. They took a lovely day out in the boat together with a picnic basket jammed full of food and met some others of the riverside creatures. Let's check in with them now and see what they get up to in chapter 2, The Open Road. Ratty, said Mole suddenly one bright summer morning, if you please, I want to ask you a favour. The rat was sitting on the riverbank singing a little song that he had just composed himself. So he was very taken up with it, and would not pay proper attention to Mole or anything else. Since early morning he had been swimming in the river in the company with his friends the ducks, and when the ducks stood on their heads suddenly, as ducks will, he would dive down and tickle their necks just under their chins, till they were forced to come to the surface again in a hurry, spluttering and angry and shaking their feathers at him, for it was impossible to say quite all you feel when your head is under water. At last they implored him to go away and attend to his own affairs and leave them to mind theirs. So the rat went away, sat on the river bank in the sun and made up a song about them, which he called Duck's Ditty. All along the backwater, through the rushes tall, ducks are a-dabbling, up tails all. Ducks' tails, drakes' tails, yellow feet a-quiver, yellow bills out of sight, busy in the river. Slushy green undergrowth, where the roach swim, here we keep our ladder, cool and full and dim. Everyone for what he likes, we like to be, heads down, tails up, dabbling free. High in the blue above, swift swall and call, we are down a-dabbling, up tails all. I don't know that I think so very much of that little song rat, observed Mole cautiously. He was no poet himself, and he didn't care who knew it. He had a candid nature. Nor do the ducks neither, replied the rat cheerfully. They say, why can't fellows be allowed to do what they like, when they like, and as they like, instead of other fellows sitting on banks and watching them all the time, and making remarks and poetry about them? What nonsense it all is, that's what the ducks say. So it is, said Mole with great heartiness. No, it isn't, cried the rat indignantly. Well then, it isn't, replied the Mole soothingly. But what I wanted to ask you was, won't you take me to call on Mr. Toad? I've heard so much about him. I do so want to make his acquaintance. Why, certainly, said the good-natured rat, jumping to his feet and dismissing the poetry from his mind for the day. Get the boat out and we'll paddle up at once. It's never the wrong time to call on Toad. Early or late, he's always the same fellow. Always good-tempered, always glad to see you, always sorry when you go. He must be a very nice animal, observed the Mole as he got into the boat and took the sculls, while the rat settled himself comfortably in the stern. He is indeed the best of animals, replied Rat. So simple, so good-natured and affectionate. Perhaps he's not very clever, but we can't all be geniuses. And it may be that he's boastful and conceited, but he's got some great qualities, says Toady. Rounding a bend in the river, they came in sight of a handsome, dignified old house of mellowed red brick, with well-kept lawns reaching down to the water's edge. There's Toad Hall, said the rat, and that creek on the left where the notice board says private, no landing, that leads to his boathouse where we can leave the boat. The stables are over there to the right, and that's the banqueting hall you're looking at now. Very old, that is. Toad is rather rich, you know, and this is really one of the nicest houses in any of these parts, though he'd never cared to admit it to Toad. They glided up the creek, and Mole shipped his sculls as they passed into the shadow of a long boathouse. Here they saw many handsome boats slung from the crossbeams or hauled up on a slip, but none in the water, and the place had an unused and deserted air. The rat looked around him. I understand, said he. Boating is played out. He's tired of it. And done with it. I wonder what new fad he's taken up now. Come along and let's look him up. We shall hear all about it soon enough. They disembarked and strolled across the gay, flower-decked lawns in search of Toad, whom they presently happened upon, resting in a wicker garden chair, with a preoccupied expression on his face and a large map set out on his knees. "Hooray!" he cried, jumping up on seeing them. "This is splendid!" He shook the paws of them both warmly, never waiting for an introduction to the mole. "How kind of you," he went on, dancing around them. "I was just about to send a boat down the river for you, Ratty, with strict orders that you were to be fetched up here at once, whatever you were doing. I want you badly, both of you. Now, what will you take? Come inside and have something. You don't know how lucky it is you're turning up just now." "Let's sit quiet a bit, Toady," said Rat, throwing himself into an easy chair, while the mole took another by the side of him and made some civil remark about Toad's delightful residence. "The finest house on the whole river," cried Toad boisterously. "Or anywhere, for that matter," he could not help adding. Here Rat nudged the mole. Unfortunately, Toad saw him do it, and turned very red. There was a moment's painful silence. Then Toad burst out laughing. "All right, Ratty," he said. "It's only my way, you know, and it's not a very bad house, is it? You know, you rather like it yourself. Now, look here, let's be sensible. You are the very animals I wanted. You've got to help me, it's most important." "That's about your rowing, I suppose," said the Rat with an innocent air. "You're getting on fairly well, though you splash a good bit still. With a great deal of patience and quantity coaching, then you may—" "Oh, pooh, boating!" interrupted the Toad with great disgust. "Silly, boyish amusement. I've given that up long ago. Sheer waste of time, that's what it is. It makes me downright sorry to see you fellows, who ought to know better, spending all your energies in that aimless matter. No, I've discovered the real thing, the only genuine occupation for a lifetime. I propose to devote the remainder of mine to it, and can only regret I wasted years that lie behind me, squandered in trivialities. Come with me, dear Ratty, and your amiable friend also, if he will be so very good. Just as far as the stable-yard, and you will see what you shall see." He led the way to a stable-yard accordingly, the Rat following with a most mistrustful expression, and there, drawn out in the coach-house, there was a gypsy caravan shining with newness, painted canary yellow, picked out with green and red wheels. "There you are!" cried the Toad, straddling and expanding himself. "There's real life for you, embodied in that little cart. The open road, the dusty highway, the heath, the common, the hedgerows, the rolling downs, camps, villages, towns, cities. Here today, up and off to somewhere else tomorrow. Travel, change, interest, excitement. The whole world before you, and the horizon is always changing. And mind, this is the very finest cart of its sort that ever was built, without any exception. Come inside and look at the arrangements. Planned them all myself, I did." The mole was tremendously interested and excited, and followed him eagerly up the steps into the interior of the caravan. The Rat only snorted and thrust his hands deep into his pockets, remaining where he was. It was indeed very compact and comfortable. Little sleeping bunks, a little table that folded up into the wall, a cooking stove, lockers, bookshelves, and a bird cage with a bird in it, and pots, pans, jugs, and kettles of every size and variety. "All complete," said the Toad triumphantly, pulling open a locker. "You see, biscuits, potted lobsters, sardines, everything you could possibly want. Soda water here, tobacco there, letter paper, bacon, jam, cards, and dominoes, you'll find," he continued, as they descended the steps again. "You'll find that nothing whatsoever has been forgotten when we make our start this afternoon." "I beg your pardon," said the Rat slowly as he chewed at a straw. "But did I overhear you say something about we and start and this afternoon?" Now, you dear good old Ratty, said Toad imploringly, don't begin talking in that stiff and sniffy sort of way, because you know you've got to come. I can't possibly manage without you. So, consider it settled and don't argue. It's the only one thing I can't stand. You surely don't mean to stick to your dull, fusty old river all your life and just live in a little hole in the bank and boat? I want to show you the world. I'm going to make an animal of you, my boy. I don't care, said the rat doggedly. I'm not coming, and that's that. I am going to stick to my old river and live in a hole and boat, as I've always done. And what's more, Mole's going to stick with me and do as I do. Aren't you, Mole? Of course I am, said Mole loyally. Oh, I'll always stick to you, Rat, and what you say is to be has got to be. All the same, it sounds as if it might have been, well, rather fun, you know, he added wistfully. Poor Mole. The life adventurous was so new a thing to him and so thrilling, and this fresh aspect of it was so tempting, that he had fallen in love at first sight with the canary-coloured cart and all its little fitments. The rat saw what was passing in his mind and wavered. He hated disappointing people, and he was fond of Mole, and would do almost anything to oblige him. Toad was watching both of them closely. Come along in and have some lunch, he said diplomatically, and we'll talk it over. We needn't decide anything in a hurry. Of course, I don't really care. I only want to give pleasure to you fellows. Live for others. That's my motto in life. During luncheon, which was excellent, of course, as everything in Toad Hall always was, the Toad simply let himself go. Disregarding the rat, he proceeded to play upon the inexperienced Mole as on a harp. Naturally a voluble animal, and always mastered by his imagination, he painted the prospects of the trip and the joys of the open life and the roadside in such glowing colours that Mole could hardly sit still in his chair for excitement. Somehow, it soon seemed taken for granted by all three of them that the trip was a settled thing, and that Rat, though still unconvinced in his mind, allowed his good-natured side to override his personal objections. He could not bear to disappoint his two friends, who were already deep in schemes and anticipations, planning out each day's separate occupation for several weeks ahead. When they were quite ready, the now triumphant Toad led his companions to the paddock and set them to capture the old grey horse, who, without having been consulted and to his own extreme annoyance, had been told by Toad that this dusty job and dustiest of expeditions was for him. He frankly preferred the paddock and took a great deal of catching. Meantime, Toad packed the lockers still tighter with necessities and hung nose-bags, nets of onions, bundles of hay and baskets from the bottom of the cart. At last, the horse was caught and harnessed, and they set off, all talking at once, each animal either trudging by the side of the cart or sitting on the shaft as the humour took him. It was a golden afternoon. The smell of the dust they kicked up was rich and satisfying. Out of thick orchards on either side of the road, birds called and whistled to them cheerily. Good-natured wayfarers passing them gave them a good day, or stopped to say nice things about their beautiful cart. And rabbits, sitting at their front door in the hedgerows, held up their forepaws and said, "Oh my, oh my, oh my." Late in the evening, tired and happy and miles from home, they drew up on a remote common, far from habitations, turned the horse loose to graze, and ate their simple supper, sitting on the grass by the side of the cart. Toad talked big about all that he was going to do in the days to come, while stars grew fuller and larger all around them, and a yellow moon, appearing suddenly and silently from nowhere in particular, came to them, give them company, and listened to their talk. At last they turned into their little bunks in the cart, and Toad, kicking out his legs sleepily, said, "Well, good night, you fellows. This is the real life for a gentleman. Talk about your old river." "I don't talk about my river," replied the patient rat. "You know I don't, Toad, but I think about it," he added pathetically in a lower tone. "I think about it all the time." The mole reached out from under his blanket, felt for Rat's paw in the darkness, and gave it a squeeze. "I'll do whatever you like, Ratty," he whispered. "We shall run away tomorrow morning, quite early, very early, and go back to our dear old bank on the river." No, we'll see it out," whispered back the Rat. "Thanks awfully, but I ought to let's whisper that bit. Okay." The mole reached out from under his blanket, felt for Rat's paw in the darkness, and gave it a squeeze. "I'll do what you like, Ratty," he whispered. "Shall we run away tomorrow morning, quite early, very early, and go back to our dear old hole on the river?" No, we'll see it out," whispered back the Rat. "Thanks awfully, but I ought to stick by Toad till this trip's ended. It wouldn't be safe for him to be left on his own. It won't take very long. His fads never do. Good night." The end was indeed nearer than even Rat suspected. After so much open air and excitement, the Toad slept very soundly, and no matter of shaking could rouse him out of his bed the next morning. So Mole and Rat turned to quietly and manfully, and while Rat saw to the horse and lit a fire and cleaned last night's cups and platters and got things ready for breakfast, the Mole trudged off to the nearest village, a long way off, for milk and eggs and various necessities that Toad had, of course, forgotten to provide. The hard work had all been done, and the two animals were resting, thoroughly exhausted, by the time Toad appeared on the scene, fresh and gay, remarking what a pleasant, easy life this is that they're all leading now, after the cares and worries and fatigues of housekeeping had been left at home. They had a pleasant ramble that day over grassy downs and along narrow by-lanes, and camped, as before, on a common. Only this time the two guests took care that Toad should do his fair share of work. In consequence, when it was time to start the next morning, Toad was by no means so rapturous about the simplicity of primitive life, and indeed attempted to resume his place in his bunk, whence he was hauled by force. Their way lay, as before, across country by narrow lanes, and it was not till afternoon that they came out on the high road, their first high road, and there, disaster, fleet and unforeseen, sprang out upon them. Disaster momentous indeed to their expedition, but simply overwhelming in its effect on the career of dear Toad. They were strolling along the high road easily, the Mole by the horse's head talking to him, since the horse had complained that he was being frightfully left out of it, and nobody considered him in the least. The Toad and Water Rat walking behind the cart together. At least, Toad was walking, and Rat saying at intervals, "Yes, precisely, and what did you say to him?" And thinking all the time of something very different, when far behind them they heard a faint warning hum like the drone of a distant bee. Glancing back, they saw a small cloud of dust with a dark centre of energy advancing on them at incredible speed. While from out of the dust a faint "a poop poop" wailed like an uneasy animal in pain. Hardly regarding it, they tried to resume their conversation, when in an instant, as it seemed, the peaceful scene was changed, and with a blast of wind, a whirl of sound that made them jump for the nearest ditch. It was on them. The poop poop ran out in brazen shout in their ears. They had a moment's glimpse of an interior of plate glass and rich morocco, and a magnificent motor car, immense, breath-snatching and passionate, with its pilots tense and hugging at the wheel, processed all earth and air for a fraction of a second, flung an enveloping cloud of dust that blinded and wrapped them totally, and then dwindled into a speck in the far distance, changed back into a droning bee once more. The old grey horse, dreaming, and he plodded along of his quiet paddock, in a raw new situation such as this, simply abandoned himself to his natural emotions, rearing and plunging, backing steadily, in spite of all Mole's efforts at his head, and all Mole's lively language directed at his better feelings. He drove the cart backwards towards a deep ditch at the side of the road. It wavered an instant, and there was a heart-rending crash, and the canary-coloured cart, their pride and joy, lay on its side in a ditch, an irredeemable wreck. The rat danced up and down in the road. "You villains!" he shouted, shaking both fists. "You scoundrels! You highwaymen! You road hogs!" I'll have the law of you. I'll report you. I'll take you through all the courts. His homesickness had quite slipped away from him, and for a moment he was the skipper of the canary-coloured vessel, driving onto the shoals by the reckless jockeying of rival mariners. And he was trying to recollect all the fine and biting things that he used to say to the master of steam launchers when in their wash, as they drove too near the bank. He used to flood his parlour carpet at home. Toad sat straight down in the middle of the dusty road, his legs stretched out before him, and stared fixedly in the distance at the direction of the disappearing motor car. He breathed short, and his face wore a placid, satisfied expression. And at intervals he murmured faintly, "Poop, poop." The mole was busy trying to quiet the horse, which he succeeded in doing after a time, and then went back to look at the cart on its side in a ditch. It was indeed a sorry sight. Panels and windows smashed, axles hopelessly bent, one wheel off, sardine tins scattered over the wide world, and the bird in the bird cage sobbing pitifully and calling to be let out. The rat came to help him, but their united efforts were not significant enough to right the cart. "Hi, Toad!" they cried. "Come and bear a hand, can't you?" The toad never answered a word or budged from his seat in the road, so they went to see what was the matter with him. They found him in a sort of trance, a happy smile on his face, his eyes still fixed in the dusty wake of their destroyer. At intervals he still seemed to murmur, "Poop, poop." The rat shook him by the shoulder. "Are you coming to help us, Toad?" he demanded sternly. "Glorious staring sight," murmured Toad, never offering to move. "The poetry of motion, the real way to travel, the only way to travel. Here today, in next week, tomorrow, villages skipped, towns and cities jumped. Always somebody else's horizon. Oh, bliss. Oh, poop, poop. Oh, my, oh, my." "Oh, stop being a fool, Toad," cried Mole despairingly. "And to think I never knew," went on Toad in a dreamy monotone. "All those wasted years that lie behind me, I never knew, never dreamt. But now that I know, now that I fully realise, oh, what a flowery track spreads before me henceforth. What dust cloud shall I bring up behind me as I speed on my reckless way? What cart shall I fling carelessly into the ditch in the wake of my magnificent onset? Horrid little carts, common carts, canary-coloured carts." "What are we to do with him?" asked Mole of the water rat. "Nothing at all," replied the rat firmly, "because there really is nothing to be done. You see, I know him from old, and he is now possessed. He's got a new craze, and it always takes him this way in its first stage. He'll continue like that for days now, like an animal walking in a happy dream, quite useless for all practical purposes. Never mind him. Let's go and see what can be done about this cart." A careful inspection showed them that even if they succeeded in righting it by themselves, the cart would travel no longer. The axles were in a hopeless state, and the missing wheel was shattered to pieces. The rat knotted the horse's reins over his hand and took him by the head, carrying the bird cage and its hysterical occupant in the other. "Come on," he said grimly to the mole. "It's 5 or 6 miles to the nearest town. We'll just have to walk. The sooner we make a start, the better." "But what about Toad?" asked Mole anxiously as they set off together. "We can't leave him here, sitting in the middle of the road by himself. In the distracted state he's in, it's not safe. Supposing another thing were to come along." "Oh, bother Toad," said Rat savagely. "I've done with him." They had not proceeded very far on their way, however, when there was a pattering of feet behind them, and Toad caught up and thrust a paw inside the elbow of each of them, still breathing short and staring into vacancy. "Now look here, Toad," said the rat sharply. "As soon as we get to town, you'll have to go to the police station and see if they know anything about that motor car and who it belongs to. Lodge a complaint against it. And then you'll have to go to the blacksmith, the or a wheelwright and arrange for the cart to be fetched and mended and put to rights. It'll take time, but it's not quite a hopeless smash. Meanwhile, the Toad and I will go to an inn and find comfortable rooms where we can stay till the cart is ready, until your nerves have recovered from their shock. Police station, complaint, murmured Toad dreamily. Me? Complain of that beautiful, that heavenly vision that has just crossed my path? Mend the cart? I'm done with carts forever. I never want to see the cart or hear it again, Ratty. You can't think how obliged I am for you to consent with me coming on this trip. I wouldn't have gone without you, and then I might never have seen that swan, that sunbeam, that thunderbolt. I might never have heard that entrancing sound or smelt that bewitching smell. I owe it all to you, my best of friends. The rat turned from him in despair. You see what it is, he said to Mole, addressing him across Toad's head. He's quite hopeless. I give up. When we get to town, we'll go to the railway station, and with any luck we may just pick up a train that'll get us back to the river bank tonight. And if you ever catch me going a-pleasuring with this provoking animal again... He snorted, and during the rest of that weary trudge, addressed his remarks exclusively to Mole. On reaching the town, they went straight to the station and deposited Toad in the second-class waiting room, giving a porter 2 pence to keep a strict eye on him. They then left the horse at the inn stable and gave what directions they could about the cart and its contents. Eventually, a slow train having landed them at a station not very far from Toad Hall, they escorted him, sleepy-walking and spellbound, to his door and put him inside it, instructed his housekeeper to feed him, dress him and put him to bed. Then they got out their boat from the boathouse, sculled down the river home, and at a very late hour sat down to supper in their own cosy riverside parlour, to the rat's great enjoyment and contentment. The following evening, Mole, who had risen late and taken things very easy all day, was sitting on the bank and fishing, when the rat, who had been looking up his friends and gossiping, came strolling along to find him. "Heard the news," he said. "There's nothing else being talked about all along the river bank. Toad went up to town by the early train this morning, and he has ordered a large and very expensive motor car." There we go. That's the end of chapter 2. We've met ourselves another character, Mr. Toad, and they have gone off on quite an adventure with him. Now, this book was written in 1908, so cars looked very different back then, and I've got a little challenge for you. Using the internet if you've got it, or your imagination if you'd rather, try to think of what a car might have looked like 110 years ago. Draw a picture, maybe Toad's driving at the wheel, and if you want to, you can send it to me on Twitter with the link down there. Either way, I will see you tomorrow for chapter 3, and we'll see what they get up to next. See you tomorrow.